We would like to say a warm hello to everyone and welcome to the Wireless Global Congress Summer Webinar Series. Your webinar is about to commence and all attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. After each presentation, there will be a question and answer session. So if you have any questions you would like to raise, please enter them into the questions pane on your control panel, which you will find on the top right-hand side of your screen. I would now like to hand over to your host for this webinar, Mr. Tiago Rodrigues, CEO of the Wireless Broadband Alliance. Tiago?
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to one more webinar from the WBA. So we are running this webinar series throughout June and July. So today's topic is about public and guest Wi-Fi and the next chapter for this business. As we all know, public and guest Wi-Fi plays an instrumental role to provide connectivity when we are outside our house and our offices. And it's relevant to share with all of you the latest developments, the latest trends, and for that we have a fantastic lineup of speakers that will bring different perspectives from carriers and service providers, but as well from retail and sharing some of the latest monetization strategies on public Wi-Fi. As I said, we had a series of webinars, and I reinforce that throughout July, every Wednesday, we'll have one more webinar. And I want to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Without them, we could not develop these sessions, and hope you have been enjoying them. So a big thank you to Cisco, Intel, and Boingo as our charter sponsors, but as well Cognitive Systems, Global Reach Technologies, Semion Conductors, Huawei, YConnect, Maxima Telecom, and STL as our diamond sponsors. This session today, we have a great lineup of speakers. We'll start with Chris Bruce, the Managing Director from Global Reach Technology and member of the board of WBA. Then we will have Kishore Raja, VP Engineering Strategy from Boingo. Then Elton Ware, Senior Director for Global Technology at McDonald's. We share the views from McDonald's. Shantu Kulkarni, Head of Network Software from STL. Then we'll have Chris Bruce and David Dutton from Telecom Infra Project. And then Brian Jacks, the CEO of YConnect. And we'll finish the session with my colleague Steve Nam, that is our Director from Membership and Industry Engagement. So now that we know who are the speakers, I would like to spend just 1 minute to get to know better the audience that we have today. So we are going to pop up a survey that will come up on the screen, and you can somehow select which type of organization you are affiliated with, and that will give us a perspective who you are and which type of companies are represented on this webinar. So this will allow us to go more direct and look into the challenges that your companies may be having on this public Wi-Fi business. So believe you are seeing the screen, and please just select which company type of company you represent.
Would you like me to show the results, Tiago?
Yes, if you already have, let's share it.
That's not showing. Sorry. There we go.
Okay, perfect. So we have a significant number of members from operators and service providers, a good number of technology vendors participating as well, and then some other companies, roaming hubs, and enterprise as well. So an interesting and nice, good mix of participants, especially between operators and vendors. Okay, thank you so much for that. And let me just bring back my slides, and without further delays, want to welcome Chris. Welcome to one more webinar from WBA, and we'll hand over to you now the screen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tiago, and hello, everybody, wherever you are dialing in from around the world. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I'm delighted to be returning here to join the WBA summer series of webinars. And today I'd like to talk about the future of public Wi-Fi, and in particular what you might call the new normal and beyond. Not quite infinity and beyond, but after 3 months of this COVID experience, it's feeling a bit like an infinity, maybe a surreal infinity. But I want to reflect on some of the mega trends that's happening in our industry, what's affecting Wi-Fi operators, for venues, the monetization model, and some of the technology changes that are afoot. So I'm delighted to be associated with the WBA. As Tiago says, I'm a board member of the WBA and have been for more or less 10 years, both with British Telecom, my previous company, and now with Global Reach. And we are providers of software and services that enable users to connect to Wi-Fi networks for operators. So reflecting on what's happening with venues, and a bit of this is kind of mega trends before COVID, and some of it will be what's happening now. But as we know, more and more retail and events are happening online, and for retail in particular, it's been about creating an experience when you go shopping or when you go to a venue. Even for concerts, it's about sharing the experience, video or uploading to social media. And then for the retailers, it's creating that concept store, that experiential environment. And then in order to get best value of that, it's all about how you engage with the customer, the user, through analytics, capturing information, and big data, all of which, of course, has got to be done within the data privacy rules, GDPR for Europe, and other initiatives around the world. And I first realized how important Wi-Fi was a few years ago when I was on my way to work in London, central London, and I saw this truck, and it got this poster on the side of the truck, and this is a big truck. Now, for those not based in the UK, you may not know what Wetherspoons is, but they are a chain of what was then 750 pubs and bars where you can order food and have a meal and drink the beer. And what occurred to me that was interesting with this is, out of all the things that Wetherspoons could message on the side of their truck, it wasn't the quality of the beer, it wasn't the food, it wasn't the ambience, it wasn't the events going on at the venue. It was actually your ability to get online. And that's when I thought, hello, Wi-Fi is now integral to this company and other venues. So moving on then, in the last 3 months, things have obviously changed a bit. And, to a certain extent, Catalyst may have been a catalyst for some sort of change, whether it's remote distance learning, whether it's remote working, whether it's video on Zoom and other things. But now we're starting to come out of that, and we're starting to, in some countries, starting to get back to some sort of new normal. How do we manage that, use technology to manage that return to a face-to-face environment and a venue, which is so critical to stimulate our economy? And it could be ordering by app before you get to the venue, before you get to that coffee, ordering that coffee or bagel before you actually get to the store. It could be, certainly in this country, in the UK, encouraging users to pay cashless, so not touching the physical coins or the notes. Obviously, social distancing has been well messaged to everybody. and then the user experience, actually being alone with your session and not having that opportunity to be with people. So getting back into this sort of new normal, I've looked at a couple of stats here, and these are charts. One's from on the left-hand side from the UK, and the other's on the right-hand side from the US. So what's the attitude to coming back after lockdown? And this one on the left was taken at the end of May. So things have moved around and changed, but at the end of May, around 60% of respondents weren't sure that they wanted to rush back to the pub, the theatre or concert. But then you look to the right-hand side in the US, you see how attitudes have changed and moved. These are the same questions about going out, going on vacation, going to the mall, going to a museum at different times. Last week of April, towards a month later in May, and then sort of beginning of June, and you see those lighter blue to darker blue changing the percentage of adults who would be prepared to go and do these things. Now, of course, since June, things have changed in the US again, and some states have rolled back a bit. So it would be interesting to see what it would look like in July. And I guess that's my point, that this is not a linear, it's not a linear move. We're going to go back and forward, and different states and different towns are going to go back and forward, and we're still going to need technology to keep us connected. And so my question for you, which I'd like to ask you, is what if you're involved in Wi-Fi networks, if you're an operator of networks, or if you're enabling somebody, company, what changes are you making in the light of COVID towards public Wi-Fi? So I wonder if we could run that poll and just ask you to give us just a sense of how things are changing for you. So just pick one of those that resonates, if you wouldn't mind, and we'll present the results in a second. Okay, if we may take a second or two, if we could show the results coming in.
They're still voting. Just one moment, Chris, please.
Still voting. The world has spoken. We just don't know what it says. Okay, interesting. So, well, I suppose the thing, crowd analytics for social distancing. Yeah, that's interesting. Yes, that's certainly something that I'm very familiar with. User journey changes. How to connect, perhaps. Social distancing, messaging. Well, certainly in this country, in the UK, we're being encouraged to spread the word. Nobody doing opt-in for track and trace. So, if you've come to this pub or restaurant and you'd like to make sure that if there was an event, you'd be contacted afterwards, which people are doing with scraps of paper in the UK in the pubs. No changes planned for almost half. But, on the other hand, 53% are making changes. So very interesting. Okay, well, let's move on. Hello, what's happening here? What's happened here? I can't seem to. Okay, so in the meanwhile, the world has moved on while we've been locked up and locked down, and I've got a number of headlines here which really, I think, have been underlying the Wi-Fi industry ahead of COVID, and probably just accelerated some of them as well. So the big one we all know about is data privacy. That whole balance between managing the user's right to be anonymous, with the venues aim to pay for the free service and seeking permission to use contact information as a kind of a fair trade. And I sort of see these as a bit of a data conundrum. Data privacy versus monetization, how we manage that. Device security versus ease of use. Sometimes they're diametrically opposed. And to me, it's all about access and identity management, and how we do that safely and securely in a way that's enhances the user experience but protects people as well. And if they do donate information or allow it to be used, and they do so knowingly. And just to make life interesting, contact tracing and legal intercepts are things that are outside of this commercial model, but for one reason or another, governmental bodies are increasingly asking for information to help with those two things. But we were, kind of knew what we were doing, about a few weeks ago, and then something happened, and not quite the rug being pulled out, but perhaps the trick where you kind of pull the tablecloth and hope everything stays on the table. Well, actually, we're a complicated ecosystem in Wi-Fi, and there are all sorts of parties from network vendors to device players, operators, advertisers. But something called MAC randomization came upon us. We knew this from Android a while back, but we've started to see in the developer community for iOS and Apple that actually Apple have got some interesting plans afoot, which will increasingly roll out during the next couple of months ahead of their full release. And we'll see beta users using this, and then probably journalists will pick up on it. But basically, their plans are, as currently stated, to randomize the MAC address every 24 hours. So you've got one address, so that for that day, when you reconnect to a Wi-Fi network, that's fine. Remember who you are because you already put in your password and username. But actually, when you come back tomorrow, it's all over again. It's a bit like a kind of Wi-Fi Groundhog Day, if you're not careful, that every day I'm going to have to go back and put in my login name, password, and username. No returning user journey. Well, that's probably the kind of the worst case scenario. And I think as an industry, we've got to work with our venue partners to figure out how do we get around this so that we, on the one hand, respect what Apple is trying to do, which is protect privacy, but at the same time understand that the provision of Wi-Fi is not cost-free. It's a value-added service. It's a provision, and for some venues, there's a cost there that they feel a need to monetize, or in fact need to monetize in order to use in order to keep in contact with their customers and users. So it's all about user experience, in my view, and that's been the aim of the WBA to improve this experience for many, many years. And the good news is that with Hotspot 2, or Passpoint as the WFA call it, we can achieve that frictionless connection once a profile is installed. Now that is a bit of a big once. Either it's got to be downloaded onto a SIM by your operator, or onboarded with QR code or some other web link. Now we know again Apple have made that a slightly less intuitive process, again with data privacy in mind, so we can't get away from that. So looking forward, we've got to look at something called Cat Port that would allow, once the profile's on there, a venue to still communicate with the user using something called venue URL with the third release of Hotspot 2, and something that Google and Android have been working on called Cat Port, which allows you to message the user and still have an advertising channel, or allow users to accept T's and C's. So that is a big discontinuity, and as an industry, we need to get our heads around how we help our venue partners and our users get the most out of this without feeling hugely frustrated. So what's the next thing? Federated roaming, known in the WBA as open roaming. I think this is a game changer, a real game changer, in that it lowers the barrier to entry for any Wi-Fi network to participate. No longer do you have to be a mobile operator or an MSO, cable company. Now any venue can participate, and the standards and the specifications being proposed and enforced by the WBA will ensure us to scale this significantly, so that there are clear commercial models for traditional venues around data analytics, around mobile offload, which we know well from today's model that can be transitioned to this, and as the Americans call it, carpeted enterprise, where connecting in with the corporate directory, we can enable a seamless experience for employees, contractors, guests, coming to the premises. And you know, these different models may be it may not be discrete. You could still do offload at a vanilla carpeted office. So moving ahead, the other big thing about is convergence. There's convergence ahead. Wi-Fi and cellular. These are no longer two different worlds, or they shouldn't be. And to me, and this is another game changer. You know, the Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E emergence of a technology that can use such increased spectrum that's available in the US, South Korea now, and hopefully in the UK when Ofcom's finished its consulting, and other parts of Europe. I really see this will change completely. And at a time when cellular operators are openly saying they can't charge a premium for 5G, then I think we've got to look at how to save costs by creating a heterogeneous network rather than just simple offload. And if you listen to the Metis aerospace application, then this is not just about consumer, this is about industrial IoT too. I encourage you to look at Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E if you've not already done so. So another quick poll, a quick canter through some of the things that I think will impact our industry, and I'd like to know what you think. So pick one of the one or more of the ones here that you think will have a big impact in the next period of time. So if you could just complete that. Okay, we still polling, Sarah?
Still coming through. Okay, I think we're there.
Well, hopefully that's given you food for thought. And oh, there we go. Fairly good spread across all areas. Short term, certainly COVID and the economic impact of that, I think, is clearly going to affect us all. But top of the pops is convergence and the use of spectrum, the 6 gig spectrum. Then comes federated roaming, open roaming, closely followed by user experience and the impact of MAC randomization. Probably you could look at those two in the same light. So thank you for your feedback. Really good to get a net sense of where you're coming from, and I think it'll help the other speakers as they present later on. So over to you, Tiago. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Chris, for the great presentation and for making this presentation so interactive. Let me just bring a couple of questions that I see here. So we saw the survey that the audience shared with us. I think the #1 topic was the convergence spectrum. I know that Kishore is going to talk about, so the next speaker will do a deep dive on the convergence. But I'm interested on your opinion, Chris, on the federated roaming and the MAC randomization. What are your views on that? What are the implications that you see coming from those two angles?
Okay, well, federated roaming, open roaming, I just think this will be a game changer. You know, we have all of the technology, all the piece parts to enable identities to be created and connect to Wi-Fi networks. We have the hotspot 2, 802.11.1x and U to identify and search for networks. What we've missed in Wi-Fi roaming, to be perfectly honest, is industrial ways of doing this. We at Global Reach have got experience of working with major carriers and major venues, but frankly, it does take some time, some months to get all of that working and a commercial agreement and everybody satisfied. And you couldn't do that for every small location or every small IDP. So I think the opportunity to participate as a coffee shop or a retail chain or a vanilla enterprise location just opens that up completely. And for the operator and the IDP, well, it just increases the number of locations where you can either offload or provide access for your social media users. MAC randomization, at one level you could say, oh, okay, well, this clearly makes the case for hotspot 2 pass point, and it does. but we have to recognize that it's not necessarily a simple path, that there are challenges to get there in terms of onboarding profiles. And I think the WBA has got to double up its efforts on how we make that a simpler process for everybody. But I've been a big believer in Passpoint for many years, and I think we should just get to that as quickly as possible and work as an industry to make that seamless. Because why do I have to keep putting in a password and username every day on my train, which I still have to do when I go to work London in normal times? I don't want to do that. I don't want Wi-Fi Groundhog Day.
Yeah, I totally agree, Chris. And we don't want to continuously change passwords and registration processes, regardless if we go to the train or to a coffee shop or to a restaurant, and every day changing passwords all the time. So Chris, thank you so much for being part of the webinar. I propose that we move on the agenda. So the next speaker is Kishore Raja, the Vice President of Engineering for Boingo Wireless and a long-time contributor of the Alliance. So over to you, Kishore.
Hey, thanks, Diego. Greetings, everybody from Southern California. So welcome all to this presentation on future of Wi-Fi for the enterprise. So Chris talked about the current situation. There's some great insights he had into handling the COVID-19 situation. So what I'm going to be talking about is from a different perspective, right? So some of the concepts you're going to perhaps see them repeat, but it's going to be from how do we address the enterprise going forward down the line in the future. So as Diego mentioned, I'm the VP of Engineering at Boingo Wireless. I'm also a long-time member at Wireless Broadband Alliance. So I chair the next generation work group, and been with the WBA for more than 8 years now, and it's like amazing amount of innovation happening, and the way we push things to the market, it's like really a great place to be there. All right, so let's jump into the presentation. So I'm not in presentation mode, but hopefully you guys can see the slides. So the presentation I have is in 3 parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about Boingo, and then the first part is I'm going to talk about enterprise connectivity. What exactly is in enterprise, and what do you mean by connecting in an enterprise? What kind of things do you need to connect in an enterprise, and where is Wi-Fi position, right? And the next one is I'm going to talk about the current industry market state. As most of you know, Wi-Fi has been there for at least 2 decades now. So how has Wi-Fi evolved, and what's going on, not just from a technology specifications perspective, but even from an industry? How has the industry adopted these technologies? And last but not the least is really the key, right? I'm going to show certain monetization opportunities. A technology is only as good as it allows you to monetize and create revenue opportunities. So as many of you perhaps know, we've been doing this at Boingo for close to 20 years now. 2001 is when we started. So let's get to that. So who is Boingo Wireless, right? So Boingo is a neutral host Wi-Fi service provider, started back in 2001, and we basically do 4 things. Number one is we acquire spectrum broadcast rights to high capacity venues like airports and convention centers, malls, and military bases. And then number 2, once we acquire the broadcast rights, we deploy state-of-the-art networks. These can be unlicensed networks with Wi-Fi or IoT, licensed networks with DAS and small cells, and even shared license with CBRS and going forward private LTE too, right? And number 3, then we find ways to monetize through different means, through carriers, through loyalty programs, through advertisements, through retail, public Wi-Fi and guest Wi-Fi, tenant services. And number 4, last but not the least, is we continue to provide a great customer experience, because that's what keeps the customers and the enterprises coming back to us year after year. So right now we serve more than 1 billion consumers annually on all of these venues. We have more than about 2,000, maybe close to 3,000 venues now, and we deploy all of these technologies in the busy traffic areas. Okay, so before we get into enterprise, let's talk about some of the use cases. What are enterprises really demanding? They're demanding for more. And what's more? More connectivity, more capacity, more use cases, new use cases. And these are some of the use cases, right? So IoT is mostly a strategy. It's not really a technology. It's not really a use case, but it has its own slew of use cases within this segment. Then you have data. Chris talked about data and some of the options, and I'm going to talk about this in the subsequent slides. There's a whole section I have on data monetization and what else you can do with data, with artificial intelligence and machine learning and things like that. So these are all some of the use cases you see in a typical enterprise. Maybe not autonomous vehicles, but it's just a use case that's demanding always connectivity, seamless connectivity, secure connectivity, and convergence that Chris was talking earlier. We are a big believer in convergence of different wireless technologies, as Tiago outlined. I have a few slides to talk about that. All right, so what kind of wireless technology would fit well for an enterprise deployment? All of these that you see around the enterprise fits really well for deploying. It could be LTE technology for the carriers, 4G and 3G technologies. Passpoint, we have been deploying Passpoint for at least 6 years now. We have carrier offload, where carriers, MNOs are offloading onto our venues using Passpoint. Then you have all kinds of other technologies. But of course, Wi-Fi, with existing Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, a prominent stance, as one of the main technology. It's a de facto technology for deploying in enterprises, right? So let's look at what features do we need for enterprise connectivity. So a typical enterprise will need the features that's displayed here on the left side of the screen. When you have a network in any enterprise, you want to make sure that the devices and the users, they seamlessly discover the network. You don't want to be going and searching for SSIDs or opening web pages to find what network to connect to or what ways to authenticate. So that seamless discovery is very crucial. And then having automatic connection. With Passpoint and NGH, you have the Wi-Fi technology matured and available in millions of devices where the devices can connect to networks automatically. And then very important that when you have an automatic connection, it has to be secure as well. So nobody can really eavesdrop on the connection nor the data transfer that's happening on. And then the last two features is mobility, right? In a large enterprise, a user would be walking from one area to another area. In a mall, you're perhaps in a food court or maybe in an airport. You want to go from your entry area all the way to your terminal. So you want to be connected when you're moving. So the concept of mobility between one access point to another access point is going to be key. And then last but not the least, actually a very important point is convergence. You want to have the ability in a venue to hand off between Wi-Fi and other types of networks. The other types could be LTE network, it could be 3G, 4G, or a shared license network, and then back onto a Wi-Fi network. So that's going to be key. Now, does Wi-Fi support all of this? Absolutely it does. Not only does Wi-Fi support all of these, on top of that, it also supports these additional features on the right. With the advent of Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, Wi-Fi networks will now have a high efficiency factor in the deployment. In the past, in the pre-Wi-Fi 6 era, the spectrum and the network efficiency of Wi-Fi was roughly about 50%, because it's an unlicensed spectrum and the way the connections and the protocol work. 50% of the time, or the spectrum would be spent in negotiations and retransmissions and things like that. Whereas in Wi-Fi 6, that goes all the way up to 80%. It's exactly the same amount of efficiency that LTE has, which is 80%. Now, Wi-Fi 6 also allows you to deploy in smaller channel bandwidths. A typical Wi-Fi deployment is about 20 megahertz. You can go to 40 megahertz, 80 megahertz, and 160 megahertz. But with Wi-Fi 6, you can go all the way down to 2 megahertz, which means it's well suited for IoT style of deployment. And then dense deployments. So, when you deploy Wi-Fi and, when you promise saying that, hey, you can have users connecting at 100 megabits per second, that's probably going to be good if you have like 10 or 5 users connected to the access point or the system. What when you have, let's say, 60, 80, or 100 users? That is when, the previous generations of Wi-Fi struggle to maintain that capacity and latency. Whereas Wi-Fi 6 and 6E, they are suited for dense deployments. Even at scale, at peak capacity, you can still provide the same amount of bandwidth as well as latency, that lower latency at scale. And the last two is really, virtualization. Wi-Fi is headed towards NFV and SDN, where you only have an access point deployed. The rest of it is in the cloud. And then it's also well suited for first responders, right? So be it like E911, 911 calling here in the States, or fire, police, and ambulance, when they have to walk into the venue for whatever emergency situation, Wi-Fi is well positioned to address that part of the area as well. So that's about enterprise. So let's switch into the second area. So how is the industry adopting Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi features so far? So when Wi-Fi started back in early 2000s, I mean, this is when Boingo has been following these models. So we started along with the industry as a retail Wi-Fi service provider. So we were deploying hotspots in areas and having users connect on their laptops. Back those days, it used to be mostly Windows laptops, and then Macintosh, because phones barely had Wi-Fi connections, Wi-Fi chipsets back then, right? So it was a per connect model, and it was less secure. There's a lot of friction, meaning the user has to do a whole bunch of steps before they can get connected and authenticated to the network. Now, fast forward into 2010, it started to become crowdsourced Wi-Fi, right? So we started to look at areas where not only that you have paid Wi-Fi, but people were expecting Wi-Fi to be like a commodity, like water and electricity, right? So people expect Wi-Fi to be free. Obviously, right now that's the case as well. So the way to monetize was we started to do advertisements and sponsorships on Wi-Fi by doing large-scale roaming deals with the operators, and then switched to 2015. It was all about a seamless and secure connection with Passpoint and NGH. That is where we started to do carrier offload. The industry really adopted Wi-Fi as one of the main technology to do offload over there. And then going forward, fast forward to 2021 and beyond, Chris talked about this as well, the concept of federated and converged Wi-Fi, right? It's not just about Wi-Fi. It's having a homogeneous network. For an average Joe, it doesn't matter what network they connect to. At one point of time, they're connected to Wi-Fi. They move out of the area where you have Wi-Fi coverage, and they have to be transitioned to connect to LTE, and then hand it off back into Wi-Fi. So having that concept of convergence is going to be very key for a quality experience and consistent user experience, especially in dense enterprise venues. And that is where the industry is headed. Not only that seamless and secure connection, but even seamless and secure provisioning with what's going on with enterprise Wi-Fi, open roaming, and automated agreements between operators. So Wi-Fi and the wireless industry is headed into a really converged and federated way of deploying networks, mirroring and matching what cellular has done for many, many years now. When you turn on the phone, you automatically connect to cellular network. If there is a roaming contract that gets established in the background, the connection happens, authentication happens, handoff happens seamlessly. Wi-Fi had some of those challenges, and most, if not all of those have been fixed now. And once we have federated and converged Wi-Fi, it'll exactly behave the way cellular networks work. All right, so let's move on. So, which means the concept of neutral host is going to be more and more prominent. At Boingo, we believe neutral host. It's pretty much our DNA since 2001, and we've done neutral host deployments on the cellular deployments in DAS and small cells. We've done neutral host deployments in Wi-Fi for many years. We've started to do neutral host deployments on shared spectrum on CBRS. So having that concept of making sure that we have a technology agnostic approach in connecting the venues, where the venues and enterprises wanted to be always connected, ubiquitous connectivity throughout the venues, and areas where you won't be able to establish that connectivity, hand off and converge with any existing technology, right? All right, so let's jump into the next topic, which is basically the last topic of mine, is monetization. I talked about some of the opportunities, with carrier offload. Chris talked about opportunities in data. What else can we do with Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, right? So there's a whole bunch of monetization opportunities. Venue personalization, right? So when users have an engagement with the service provider, with the carrier, with the venue, when they walk into the venue, the device connects automatically, whether it's automatically or through walled gardens. The user attaches to the venue, and the service provider and the backend can actually remember who the user is. I mean, there are some complications happening with MAC randomization that Chris talked about, but for the most part, we still have an engagement with the user through Passpoint or through other mechanisms. And then using that engagement, we can push personalized services to the user. We can say things like, hey, we're going to schedule an Uber pickup for you if you're at an airport, because we've seen you before, and we know that you actually take Uber as soon as you land at this airport. Or we can recommend where certain shopping areas is within a venue, or based on the time of the day, we can recommend where you can get your favorite food and drinks and things like that. And then, of course, location-based services. In large venues, especially in airports, try going to terminal, especially when you're transitioning and moving from one terminal to another terminal, even one gate to another gate in a given terminal. So having that location-based services available to the user, where the user can be navigated on demand, is going to be key. It's a good monetization opportunity. We already talked about carrier offload a whole bunch of times before, so I'm going to skip that. Then there's also private and tenant services that you can deploy in venues. You can have dedicated Wi-Fi or enterprise networks for airport lounges, for instance, or specific type of users. Like, for instance, the airline staff would like to securely offload the data, so you can deploy a private service for them, and the main users won't connect to that. They have their own latency, their own bandwidth, their own backhaul, and that's a pretty good way to monetize on a given wireless technology. First responders, we already talked about emergency situations. Having a dedicated emergency network for all the first responders is increasingly important with what's going on with the events in the past few years, and that's not going to change going forward. So that's where even Wi-Fi can play a major role. And I already talked about advertisements, right? So there's always way to provide free Wi-Fi, and you can still monetize by pushing ads, or having users download, or having users watch a video, and all kinds of creative by taking a poll, like the polls that Chris displayed in the past. Excuse me. So there's different ways of monetization, as you can see. And the last slide I have really is a big one on data. I talked about having some subsequent slides on data monetization. So data is really an amazing topic. It's really near and dear to me, because there's just so many opportunities within data. I'm not even talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. The number one thing that we use data for improving our own networks. We continuously optimize networks. We have all of these users connecting on to our venues, right? When you have a Airbus 380 landing in a venue, I mean, not right now, hopefully the travel will start soon. You have literally about 300 to 500 people walking out of the Airbus and rushing into the venue. So we want to make sure that all of these users, most of these users, when they have automatic connections enabled, perhaps through carrier offload, not only that they seamlessly connect, but they also have the bandwidth and latency available. So we optimize the network. We run AI and machine learning on the network, and then we do bursting. We do traffic bursting to allow Wi-Fi connectivity for these users. And as soon as the users walk out of the venue, then we burst the traffic back into normal. So the other users who are actually using the network, they can continue using that. So we also do network healing. If, let's say, there's an access point somehow is faulty, it's not connected to the main part of the network, before the users actually discover and complain, we can continuously monitor the network through data, through trend analysis, and then we have written scripts, and we have created automation to automatically fix the network before the user even comes to know about it, right? So these are some of the cool things that we can do with data, and the options are really limitless in data, both for self-optimization of a given network as well as monetization. So I'm hoping that that gave a little bit perspective into where enterprises are headed, where is the industry right now, and what are the existing and new monetization opportunities. That pretty much concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kishore. Let me bring up my slides. So I'm getting a very good number of questions. I just want to say to everyone, so probably we'll not have time to go through every single question. So if we don't cover your question, we'll follow up offline, and the speakers will have the chance to reply to your question. So let's try to cover a couple of them, Kishore. So first question is about what's your preferred way to do a rollout of passpoint profiles to the end users' devices?
Yeah, great question, Tiago. So, we have different types of PassPoint engagements with users. Carriers who have a SIM card, they already have an engagement with the user, so they have a mechanism to use as part of the carrier bundle to to provision PassPoint onto the devices. But then what about the non-carriers, be it companies and service providers who have a certificate-based authentication, like a TLS-based or any other type of authentication, be it like username, password, or RFID, or MAC address, or serial number, or whatever. Then the Wi-Fi Alliance has an industry standard way to provision what we call as OSU, online sign-up server. Not only it allows you to provision that in a seamless and secure way, but it allows you to discover the service before the user actually comes to know about it. And there's also off the band services that we have used in the past, develop an OSU type of portal so users can go and provision the PassPoint. But having that standard-based approach is going to be key, and we already have the standards for that.
Yeah, thank you. Another one that you are familiar with it. So our Wi-Fi 6 and 5G can work together. Should they be considered competitors or complementary?
That's a great question, Tiago. I get asked this question almost, every single time, if not always. If you look at IMT 2020 specifications, right? I think the IMT 2020 specifications was announced back in 2015 or maybe 14 for 5G networks. The key elements like bandwidth, the latency, the packet loss, spectrum efficiency to certify a network as a 5G network. And interestingly enough, Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E satisfies all of those requirements. So I would say Wi-Fi in general is not really a competition to 5G, but it's a complementary add-on to existing 5G. Because imagine from a carrier's perspective now, right? If they want to go and add coverage and capacity in all the enterprises, you're talking about billions to trillions of dollars of investments in networks. Now the carriers can rather offload onto the existing Wi-Fi networks as long as they have seamless and secure connectivity and maintain the same quality as LTE and save those billions of dollars. And that is why Wi-Fi is literally adding close to $2 trillion of economy back into the deployments. So I would say Wi-Fi is well positioned to stay as a complementary technology with 5G and not a competition.
Yeah, thank you, Kishore. Thank you so much. So let's move on the agenda. We are slightly delayed, but still on time. Okay, so next speaker, Elton from McDonald's. So Elton, thank you and welcome to the WBA webinars. Over to you.
Great, thank you. And certainly get the slides up here and make sure everyone can see them. And I certainly feel like I'm a bit of a case study with Kishore and Chris, well placed. And so as you start to see what I talk about, it'll definitely be a lot of synergies with what's been shared so far. So again, my name is Elton Ware. I'm a Senior Director in Global Technology and just outside of downtown Chicago. Here in sunny Chicago area. So really just setting the stage real quickly. Been at McDonald's about 8 years, and one of the things I think we've done a great job at is our brand mission. And so if we think about our brand mission in global technology, how do we deliver technology capabilities that deliver upon that brand mission? And so it really is something that's an exciting time at McDonald's. We think about a lot of the areas I believe Chris talked about, as well as Kishore touched on, in a pre-COVID world versus post-COVID world. We'll touch on that a little bit in terms of what we're looking at. But what I want to make sure is just to set the context on our scale. And this is definitely 37,000 plus restaurants globally. And so if you can imagine, if we start to talk about something like public Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi within the restaurants, millions and millions of users are connecting to our Wi-Fi on a daily basis. And we like to look at them in different stakeholders. We have our franchisees, our crew, as well as our customers. And so as we look at that whole mix of stakeholders, how do we drive the right capabilities for them today, as well as looking beyond? And that definitely is one of the areas that we need to be mindful of when we think about the numbers and scale of McDonald's. And our challenge, it really is one, when you think about millions of users that connect to our Wi-Fi on a daily basis, they consume McDonald's in a variety of ways, whether that be delivery or curbside pickup or through the drive-through. How do we drive capabilities for our key stakeholders at the speed that's required? And really, I'll touch on two particular areas, not just related to Wi-Fi, but across global technology, is we need to drive those capabilities with an architectural approach and through standardization. How do you drive standardization to be able to enable efficiencies and optimize capabilities across that? So we'll touch on what we've done from an architectural approach, from a Wi-Fi perspective, as well as how we drive standard capabilities. I'll pick on a bit of the US because I'm closest to it. In my responsibilities, I provide capabilities to our enterprise global network. We deliver the standards globally for our restaurant networks. And then likewise, I have responsibility around our service management office, which really looks at service management capabilities and our processes and operational excellence. So if we think about Wi-Fi in the restaurants and picking a bit on the US, we have a global mobile app. How do we ensure that, and Chris had touched on it as well as Kishore, that seamless experience. So I think we got a theme here where users coming, they've placed a mobile order, either they're picking up curbside. How do we give them the right experience, a seamless experience from that mobile network to the Wi-Fi network while they wait for their order curbside, either downloading an email or engaging with McDonald's in a new personalized way? Those are opportunities for us, and it's definitely a requirement for our stakeholders. And really the other area when we think about performance, gone are the days of low bandwidth into the restaurant, a single access point with a single radio that kind of just sits in the front of the dining area. We need to look at performance in a couple of different areas, really around things like having multiple radios. So today's technology around 11AC, can we make sure to support some of the legacy radio bands? But if you think about all the metal, the microwaves, the fryers and things that are happening within the restaurant, we need to really look at the spectrum. So that's one area of performance. The biggest area really is all about making sure that the experience is right in the restaurant from a bandwidth standpoint and accessing those applications. And touching on frictionless a bit, Hotspot 2.0 has come up, Passpoint has come up. Those technologies are definitely things that are areas we've been deep diving on for particular reasons when we think about seamless. From that mobile transition into the Wi-Fi area, there are cases where bandwidth is not sufficient from a mobile standpoint, whether that's LTE or 4G. How do we ensure that that mobile order gets properly executed, or we want to deliver some new capabilities to our consumers? Switching to a different stakeholder, that franchisee and that crew member, how do we ensure the business applications that they're accessing over Wi-Fi, like learning and development or other business applications, have the right performance? The last particular area around really driving performance is coverage. So we think about outside of the restaurant now and being able to take orders. We want to be able to have sufficient Wi-Fi coverage there. And then likewise in the back office for some of those internal functions that require high performance. And definitely overlaid across all of that is the level of security that we need. And that security needs to be able to look at how we're connecting, how the network's configured, but then likewise, what's the content that's been looked at? If we consider things in that area, we want to make sure that we're protecting the brand McDonald's as we deliver these capabilities. So now really touching on additional areas, and I think the themes have been across the board from Chris and Kishore, so really happy to fit right here in terms of the discussion from a perspective that, IoT is certainly driving where we need to go and the things we need to look at from an industry standpoint. So if you think about things like video analytics, areas like Coke machines and fryers and robotics that all need to have connectivity within the restaurant. What's the right mix of wired versus wireless connectivity? Those are things that need to be solved. Because if it's a Wi-Fi device, what level of performance is needed if we're talking about video? And I know Kishore touched a bit on analytics and machine learning. If we're looking at video, is that processing happening there? Is it happening remotely? And so we need to have a higher performing network within the restaurant, and then decide based on that use case and performance requirements, what's the best mode of connectivity, whether Wi-Fi or wireless, whether wired or Wi-Fi. And we see in a lot of cases today, given the dynamics and environmentals, it's important to be able to have a mix of that wired capability with Wi-Fi as well. And I had touched on this a bit as we think about where the applications are hosted. That does drive what we need to do from a Wi-Fi perspective within the restaurant. And this is a bit more around the enterprise Wi-Fi that our franchisees and crew need to use, but then likewise our customers that are executing mobile orders at the restaurant. Where's that application? And the latency to get to that application. So we need to look at that and make sure we're taking an architectural approach, driving standard capabilities. And I'll touch on the standard capabilities that really talking about having a standard approach to how we deliver connectivity to the restaurant, whether that's Wi-Fi or wired connectivity. How do we look at standard solutions for how they're configured and how they're deployed? And this helps us to deliver upon the scale of McDonald's and the efficiencies that we need. So really, how do we melt those snowflakes that are out there to ensure that we're able to drive with the speed and scale to business outcomes that are needed? And this last area really has been touched on a lot, is that convergence from mobile to Wi-Fi as we come to the venue, as was described, is our restaurant. And so how do we make sure that we're creating that seamless experience from mobile to the Wi-Fi network? And then there's the school of thought, and then Kishore touched on it in the question in the last session, is will these devices in the restaurants need to be LTE or 4G based versus Wi-Fi? And I agree with what's been shared. I definitely believe there's huge value within the restaurant for connectivity to Wi-Fi. And so I don't think it'll be all shift to mobile or all shift to Wi-Fi. Definitely complementary, and I think it fits in that architectural approach that we continue to drive at McDonald's. Particularly things like our providers and vendors enabling devices with mobile capabilities. In a lot of cases, we want to push those technology boundaries to have multiple ways to connect to the network, whether that's wired, whether it's Wi-Fi based, or whether it's mobile connectivity. Ideally, we want to make sure that it's driving the right value for our key stakeholders, the franchisees, and it's delivering upon the right business outcomes that we need. So really touching on a lot of the future considerations, and these are things that are on the fringe of public Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi within the restaurants and how we use them at McDonald's, but we got to keep a close eye on it from an architectural approach. So I think the theme is consistent. 5G has been mentioned, and is it an enabler now? So if we think about IoT or we think about video in the restaurants and analytics, is that a technology that's complementary? We definitely know networks need to be built differently, and it's early days for 5G in terms of the technology and how it's supported, but it can be an enabler of key connectivity to the restaurant. But also, as we think of more broader IoT capabilities, there's definitely opportunity to be able to look closely at 5G, and it's something we're working closely with vendors and providers to better understand that. And I think tying in with that, the case for Wi-Fi 6. And I love, we're in meetings a lot, and I always like to think about McDonald's as we look at new technologies. We're a franchise organization. So understanding the value proposition of moving to technologies like Wi-Fi 6, I think about it in terms of fries and burgers, for example. And you hear a proposal and you ask yourself the question, how many hamburgers is that going to cost? So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, from a Wi-Fi 6 perspective, but we really need to see what are the applications that are going to drive that within the restaurant. If I were to think about it, opportunities for video, opportunities to drive lots of data within the restaurant to analyze data that's moving. Those are the things that are key applications if we think about the small box of a McDonald's or other QSRs. And certainly things like digital menu boards, connectivity to kiosks, and a lot more media that needs to distribute. But it's certainly one where we got to count the burgers and fries to understand the value proposition for our franchisees. And I think the last piece hasn't quite been touched on, but I think that there's a general theme if we think about where those applications are being accessed. McDonald's can appear to be many data centers. So how do we start to think about in an architectural way from the Wi-Fi out to where the applications are hosted, and are there opportunities to continue to shore up that connectivity between the restaurant and the applications to be able to drive greater scale, greater standardization, as well as an opportunity to make sure that we're taking an architectural approach. So really those were the key areas. I sort of feel like a very broad case study to the other presenters. And so at this time, I'd love to just open it up for additional questions.
Yeah, fantastic, Elton. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a few questions. Let's try to see if we can cover a couple of them. So first question, so no doubt that McDonald's is a love brand, especially if all of us that have children. McDonald's is definitely on the top list of the value of in terms of a brand. How do you guys, and especially you, Elton, how do you see the importance of a guarantee that McDonald's deliver a connectivity experience up to the level of your burgers? Because you have been creating this brand on the quality of your burgers. So how to guarantee that connectivity is up to the standard?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, you think about it, you can go to Austria or whatever part of the world and have a French fry, and it's fairly consistent. If you come back to the US, it stays the same. So when we think about technology, we have to think about it that way too. We're not there yet in terms of globally, but standardization is key. And really looking at, enterprise level capabilities. We definitely are a small box, but if you look at connectivity requirements, we have to have a lens to enterprise capabilities. So if we think about resiliency, we think about availability, it has to be looked at an enterprise level, even though we're talking about the smaller box. And so that's the lens we put on from a standardization perspective. How do we drive the reliability within the architecture that we deliver? And then how do we drive standard architectures that give us that reliability that we need?
Yeah, thank you. One more question. So will we be seeing McDonald's embracing Wi-Fi 6 and Passpoint, so latest technologies from Wi-Fi?
That's a great question, and definitely I didn't say this early, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the WBA webinar today. It's been a first for me, and so I'd say with Wi-Fi 6, it's something that we need to closely look at. Passpoint definitely are things that we need to closely look at because it speaks to that seamless connection from the mobile network or other Wi-Fi networks onto our Wi-Fi network. So more to come on that one, but it definitely is one that we need to look closely at. It needs to derive the right business value for us within the restaurant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elton. It was a great pleasure to have you on this webinar. We have a few more questions, but we need to move on. We have limited time, and we'll share those offline. So thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, moving on the agenda. So next speaker is Shantanu, the head of network software for STL. Shantanu, thank you. Welcome. The floor now is yours.
Thank you so much. It was a great presentation, but I should say that, I'm still drooling looking at those delicious burgers. So and if you know that it's dinner time in India, so it just made me more hungry. So great job, Elton. And moving on with the Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi, the next chapter presentation, so there are some numbers, probably you have seen these numbers, just to bring back the attention of what kind of insane numbers we are talking about. Now, by and large, I was going to say human beings, but now it's not anymore relevant. It's more about everyone, everything, everyone connected with everything, everywhere. So we are basically data hoggers. Right now, if we are doing this kind of webinar, we are binging Netflix series, we are doing a video conferencing or plain WhatsApping. We are just great at year on year at how large data we can really hog. If I take my own example, probably the only time I'm not hogging data is I'm eating probably the Mac burger or I'm sleeping. So other than that, we are consuming data like crazy. So if you see this graph, the way it is going, even if we see that around 51% in coming few years will be on Wi-Fi, but it's not just about the 51% of the IP traffic we are talking about. We are talking about number of petabytes which are being consumed. We are talking about something like 5.7 million petabytes which will be on the Wi-Fi, and it's enormous considering how where we were and how we have traveled. Now we heard Kishore presenting, we heard Chris presenting before me, and the data we know about it, that Wi-Fi is not new. It has been there for 2 decades. But what has recently changed is the whole carrier grade, the flavor of carrier grade that has come in Wi-Fi, which allows to integrate with the existing network structure and services, and not just overlay on some hotspot. So the kind of technologies that we are going to see has really propelled Wi-Fi into the new world. And of course, it is more reliable, varied number of application devices, and the sweet spot with the unlicensed spectrum. Just imagine we are talking about with the kind of population on Earth, we have something like 7 billion plus, having 29 or 30 billion devices connected in 3 years from now. It's just insane. So, just to take a deep dive on what's going on with this whole Wi-Fi thing. Now, if you look at, and this is one also inspired by the Cisco. If you look at Cisco, they had presented in the previous one, which was more detailed one. This is more on a high level. What I'm trying to show here is, if you're not traveling or really commuting, by the way, it will come once we understood what Kishore is doing with the whole PassPoint things, there is hardly anything left which is not under the blanket of Wi-Fi, right? Everything comes, which is directly, if you are in your home, you're in the mall, office, movies, anywhere, airports, you have Wi-Fi. I think at some point, if I'm not doing any blasphemy, it's competing with God to become kind of omnipotent. Wherever you go, you have a Wi-Fi. And if you don't get a Wi-Fi, there is something wrong with the world. Now, there was this question, it was very nicely answered by Kishore on, Wi-Fi 6 versus 5G. And since he has answered, because this gets a question every webinar to me as well. So I would just say that, whatever way it happens, it's a good news for the user, because at the end, he is the one who is going to have a great connectivity. And I see that in the beginning, we have a lot of hardware and software vendors as part of this webinar. So it's a good news for them to start making applications which are trying to balance between both of them. They are trying to put more intelligence when to shift from Wi-Fi to 5G, so that there is a ubiquitous connection everywhere, right? Now, just one thing is there, that the roles that were there between Wi-Fi, if I take Wi-Fi 6 especially, with the low latency, more reliability and high coverage, and I take 5G, they're kind of converging into their roles. That Wi-Fi 6 is becoming more like cellular by becoming more reliable, more secure, more controllable, and 5G is also coming towards the Wi-Fi by having more capacity for the user. So it's a great place that is getting up as a part of the next chapter in the whole public Wi-Fi space, with the Wi-Fi 6 and 5G coverage and connection, latency, and everything that is happening on those spaces. Before I deep dive into the public Wi-Fi next chapter use cases and some details around it, I just want to give a current picture. It's not that we are not there. There are a lot of a lot of software innovations happening for a couple of years. However, the kind of maturity that we need for those systems is yet to come. So we have a free public Wi-Fi already for some years, but we know that the experience is chunky, right? We have mobile data offload, which happens between LTE and the Wi-Fi spectrum. but it's still, in very limited places. Let me put it that way. There is software for seamless authorization connectivity, but there are problems in it. We have seen that. Wi-Fi calling is there. We have seen smart TV, AR, VR getting up some more heat in the last couple of years. Big data and analytics, there are software already there, but the usage is still limited, and there is a lot of power that can be still had, and we need to work more on that. Smart homes, advertisement, customer engagement. So these are some of the things that are already there, and we need to see how and what happens to them in the next chapter on the Wi-Fi, especially on the public Wi-Fi domain. Some of the current challenges already spoken is poor onboarding experience, network congestion. I mean, send somebody to watch a cricket match in a stadium and ask him to upload a video even of, let's say, 15 seconds, and we will understand what kind of congestion issues are being faced. Issues in seamless connectivity. Chris was talking about this groundhog, right? I mean, every time you have to get into that Wi-Fi portal and you have to give in your login details and all those things, and it's just not a great experience. Customer engagement is very trivial to say. Customer insights, again, minimal, and it could be much better. And of course, security becomes kind of always a question. That there are recommendations that if you're doing something very sensitive, very private, do not use the Wi-Fi. Now, from here, where are we going? What is the path that we are building? Definitely, Wi-Fi 6 is the way to go. Everybody's talking about it, and it is not for nothing. Between the race for 5G and Wi-Fi 6, the kind of infrastructure we have for Wi-Fi 6 and the readiness that we have for Wi-Fi 6, it is something which is round the corner, and we will see a much faster growth in that. HS2 open roaming, Boingo has been pioneer in that, has been doing a lot of great work, and the way it will happen when all the vendors get in, when we're talking about the overall standardization that came from WBA, open roaming is going to be the next big thing. LTE, Wi-Fi, interworking, when to do the offloading and so on and so forth. IoT, connected autonomous vehicle, mission critical applications, and some of the use cases that will come up. And this whole change, the driver is the sheer numbers we spoke about, the insane number. But the point is, we're talking about something which is 24 to 30 months away from where we are. Now, we did have some kind of dampening in terms of laying out the infrastructure in this last couple of months because of people under this COVID, they were not able to work. The supply chain was kind of choked and everything. But I'm very bullish about the kind of speed that Wi-Fi is going to pick up in the later half of the year and going ahead. The numbers are staggering. We are talking about in a couple of, like 24 to 30 months, we are talking about more than 600 million Wi-Fi hotspots across the planet. We're talking of Wi-Fi speed going 3 times, and the Wi-Fi 6 growth is extremely promising. It's like 13 times that it's going to grow. Of course, the Wi-Fi contribution to the total IP traffic we saw in the slide number 1, it is going to be 51%. So the whole promise about the Wi-Fi is extremely exciting, especially in the public Wi-Fi domain. So getting on to the major focus area. Now, there will be a lot of technology. I can tell you that Wi-Fi itself will have a lot of flavors in terms of Wi-Fi hotspots will continue for some time. There will be SIM-based Wi-Fi, there will be dual mode Wi-Fi, and few other combinations of Wi-Fi will come. But if we want to focus on something, and I have to do some recommendation based on my experience building software, let's look at the 4 major areas that we want to focus on. The Wi-Fi 6, HS2 or open roaming, big data analytics is a very important piece. And I think it was Kishore who said that if you're not making money out of it, then it's of no use. Of course, the monetization business models that you're going to work with. So now having these 4 areas of focus, what we have done is we have, based on this, if we look at the public Wi-Fi, we want to see what the service providers will focus on and what are the retails and hospitality, what is going to be the impact on smart cities and stadiums and event that happen, right? Now, the moment we talk about Wi-Fi 6, enough is already said on this thing, but still it feels that it's such an exciting field that every time we talk about Wi-Fi 6, it's, you have a lot of things to keep on bragging about the kind of fundamental change it will bring in the way people and machines and the things are going to connect because of all the technology, you call it the technical words of orthogonal OFDMA or TWT, or you call that MU-MIMO or BSS coloring, the way it is going to have much better traffic management, or to, let's say, much better coverage, it's going to be a whole lot of new things that is going to come in Wi-Fi 6. And that's going to increase the customer experience leaps and bounds, right? So from the service provider, it's going to be a very complementary. We spoke about 5G, that improving network efficiency, saving the spectrum because of working on the unlicensed spectrum, higher concurrency, reducing the latency, and so on and so forth. From the retails, every time I get into a hotel, wherever with my job, there is a lot of traveling involved. So before I check in and before I take my hotel keys to the room, the thing that I ask is, what is my login ID for my Wi-Fi? And this is going to be much, much better once you have Wi-Fi 6. And once we talk about open roaming, we'll see how seamless it gets, right? From the smart cities, imagine today how clunky it becomes, because we are talking about those Wi-Fi cameras. We want to ensure that there is a certain footfall happening under certain traffic conditions. We are looking at analyzing the videos and making decision based on some kind of activities that are suspicious, and those whole analysis is something that will need some kind of high-end Wi-Fi, what we are talking Wi-Fi 6. Of course, the IoT connectivity, enhanced security. And when we talk about stadium, we took the example of how difficult it is today to upload any video or something. But the moment we get into Wi-Fi 6, and when we have this whole physics of different channels and the wait time, because it's going to ensure that the kind of network resources or the slice of resources that it's going to give to somebody who is on HD video or something, as compared to somebody who's a thing like a speaker, it will ensure that there is a correct distribution of the slice of the network resources. So this is something which will really enhance the experience for stadiums and events. When we speak about the hotspot and open roaming, definitely it becomes from the let's just, if we jump to retail, if we spoke about Elton spoke about the Macs across the world, the McDonald's. So if you have something like open roaming already implemented, then you just get into there and your Wi-Fi is on, and you are like across the world, you have got roaming, and it's such a great experience. I mean, to understand that I've traveled to Austria, I get into some kind of McDonald's and my Wi-Fi starts, and I can communicate over Wi-Fi, calling and other things. It becomes a great experience, right? In smart cities, about auto network discovery, we spoke about optimization, and this is going to be a very, very important part of this. Again, you get to the stadium and other things, because there is some kind of contract from the person who's arranging the event. You get into stadium, your Wi-Fi starts. So it's a new way. The combination of Wi-Fi 6 and open roaming, the people will connect. Now, having said that you have great connectivity, what do you do with that? Is about the software that sits behind. I can tell you there's a huge amount of software, a lot of algorithms that will ensure an experience that will come out. And if you do not have this part, if you're not focusing on this part, and I'm saying especially for the hardware and software vendors, that if you do not really have the pillar of big data and analytics, then you cannot really take advantage of the first two columns. So you need to really have a good algorithms. You need to understand that how do you use that big data and analytics. You understand the customer, you understand his identity. There was example of the Uber thing, or understanding what could be the context of what the user is doing. Can we make him a better experience? So all these things can happen, cannot happen unless you do not really have a good analytics backbone. And I can tell you, right from deep packet inspection to having software on the AAA and a whole lot of things, you really need to have a very, very strong software backbone. And of course, the monetization we spoke about. We are going to see a lot of new models coming up from the monetization. See, there will be a lot of partners we are talking about once we talk about, let's say, open roaming, right? There will be a lot of a partner settlement that will come in. There will be new models coming up in terms of monetization. There is a lot of work to be done in this area. I will say that there are things done, but they are not mature yet, and we'll have to work it out so that it really becomes the next chapter. we are talking about premium Wi-Fi, and people would be able to pay for it. Promote bundled packages. When you are having a person walk into a certain retail store, you want to ensure that the retail store knows this guy, knows his identity, and the advertisements and the promotions and the deals are made up according to who that user is. If you're talking about digital signage boards where people are having certain events and they change based on the crowd that is there at the moment, gives a whole lot of different experience. And of course, we are talking about cross-sell, upsell based on the events and the promotion deals based on what that context is for that person. So that's in short, I would say, what looks towards the next chapter for public Wi-Fi. 4 areas to focus on: Wi-Fi 6, open roaming, analytics and big data, and monetization models. So bringing it all together at Sterlite, so we have been, in this area for quite some time, and there are certain things we will still continue to do as we migrate people from the existing Wi-Fi stack to the new Wi-Fi stack. So we have a whole gamut of software, including smart offloading, where we are talking about understanding what kind of quality of experience that a user will get, whether we want to keep him on LTE or we want to switch him to Wi-Fi. We have this set of software for Wi-Fi sync, link aggregation, captive portal editor, in-flight Wi-Fi, a host of monitoring tools, voice over Wi-Fi, web access gateway, HS2, analytics, and so on and so forth. So there is a complete set or gamut of things that we have on the Wi-Fi stack, which helps the public Wi-Fi and other service providers to move on to the next chapter. So that's more or less from my side, Tiago, and I'm open for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shantanu. Let me look into the questions. Okay, let's see if we can have covered 2 questions quickly. So looking to all these proliferation of public hotspots everywhere, and I know that STL manage millions of hotspots, and you have on your portfolio of customers. Based on your experience, what is going really to make the differentiation between all those networks? So picking up on our good friend Elton, so how can Elton and McDonald's differentiate from others in terms of the connectivity? What are the tools that can be played to make that differentiation based on your experience?
Yeah, I think the way I was saying it is more coming from the software piece. You really need to have a strong backbone of the software behind, which will really analyze the user identity, ensure that this is a loyal customer, he has a certain loyalty points with McDonald's, and it should be decided what kind of experience we can give at the runtime. So this is one. Second is, if there is like what Kishore was also talking about, self-healing network. If there is a situation where there is a flaw in the network, you need, because you are McDonald's, you give a consistent experience, you give a great experience. So you need to understand that there is a self-healing. You ensure that the software takes care of bypassing nodes which are having problems, but the customer experience becomes seamless. And there is a lot of big data analytics, user data analytics, and user identity management, a host of software that will come into play. So
yeah,
that's a short one. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Another one that in fact is almost a repetition of another question to Kishore. So all these big data monetization, Kishore mentioned slightly, but you mentioned a lot, Shantanu. So the big data monetization brings a lot of challenges. So we need to have different players involved, prepare the network. So there is a lot of effort, both in terms of the ecosystem that we need to prepare, but as well technically to prepare the network. So how do you think these different players can work together? So what we can do as an industry to make sure that we can explore this big data monetization opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I would say is, we are getting into a lot of disaggregation of software. I think it's important that there are a couple of things that we need to understand. First, we need to go for platformization, where different partners can plug in and they can seamlessly connect with each other, because there is a lot of challenge from the partner settlement. And unless there is not a good system integrator kind of place, a kind of a platform sitting which connects all the system, you will never get that kind of experience. So it's important to have a platform, a central platform, which is disaggregated, sitting on a cloud, which can do all those management of different access points, different controllers, bring the partners together, and bring a seamless experience. So platformization plus virtualization is the way to go for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Antonio. Thank you for being part of this and for sponsoring as well the event. So we need to move on. We are slightly delayed on the agenda. So I would like to invite the next speakers. So it's a shared presentation between Chris Bruce and David Dutton, both from the Telecom Intra project, more known as TIP. So welcome, David, Chris, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Tiago. We're going to talk today about open Wi-Fi and roaming at scale in the in WBA open roaming as well. So myself, my name is David Hutton. I'm the chief engineer of the Telecom Infra project, and I'm joined by my colleague Chris Bush, who's a solution engineer driving a lot of our Wi-Fi work. We can move on to the next slide, please, Chris. So the agenda that we want to cover today is to give a little bit of a clarification and understanding and an overview of what TIP is and what we're doing in our open Wi-Fi project group, why we believe that open and disaggregated Wi-Fi networks are important, and what we're doing in terms of provisioning of Wi-Fi infrastructure and roaming of UEs at cloud scale, and get a bit of feedback as well. I think it's important that we always do that. So I'll start off with talking about the Telecom Infra project, or TIP. Was founded in 2016. It's a collaborative community accelerating and transforming the way that telecom infrastructure is created, taken to market, and deployed. And we have quite a diverse membership that includes hundreds of member companies, from traditional service providers to ISPs to MSOs, etc., to technology partners and research institutes, to system integrators, and other types of connectivity stakeholders, such as municipalities and enterprises. These guys are going to be a lot of the end customers of this in the end, and running networks themselves. And how we work is that we have a methodology of disaggregation and building open standards-based solutions. And that disaggregation is separating out the hardware and the software components, as we heard from the last speaker. And by doing that, you can see that we reduce cost. We're basing our software on COTS hardware. It should lead to faster design and deployment lifecycle, because everything should become more and more software driven. It helps to spur innovation, because the opportunity for new vendors to come into the ecosystem is a lot easier. And we also touched on the point of interchangeability of components. So lack of no vendor lock-in and upgrading components as and when you need. We're not a standards body ourselves, but we work very, very closely with those bodies that are developing relevant standards and other industry organizations as well, such as WBA. So thank you, Tiago, for inviting us to speak. We focus more on the open implementation and building the solutions together. Next slide, please, Chris. So within TIP, we currently have 12 active project groups, and we work across the whole end-to-end network infrastructure, from access to transport to core network and services. And the products that we or our members provide that come out of this can be used in an end-to-end fashion to satisfy deployment scenarios, from ultra-rural use cases all the way through to dense urban connectivity in smart cities, and everything in between as well. The majority of the work that we have at the moment is focused on the access areas. I think we have 6 project groups focused on that, and that's because that's where the main cost is focused on actually deploying networks, both on the CapEx side and also on the OpEx side. And I think we've heard of a number of speakers before talking about the support for heterogeneous networks, and we very much support that as well. We have projects based on Wi-Fi technologies. We have projects on millimeter wave technologies, on unlicensed, on fixed access as well, and cellular connectivity. So we're very much interested in supporting what is needed by the market based on commercial demand, and that's across the board. So I want to hand over to the real expert, Chris, to talk about what is going on in the Open Wi-Fi project group. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, David. So it really is hard to imagine perhaps a more interesting time for Wi-Fi than our world of Wi-Fi 6 and certainly 6E in terms of sheer amount of bandwidth and certainly very high quality and low latency that we're now capable of today. One of the gaps in the market, and I think as David just mentioned, has been sort of that vertical silo effect that exists among controllers and access points that are typically sold today. So in open Wi-Fi, we are indeed disaggregating the Wi-Fi stack itself, offering both local breakout as well as overlay solutions, and doing so across a diverse array of white box platforms that are all encompassed and managed via an open cloud controller. So the Open Wi-Fi Project Group is an open source community that's enabling the democratization, if you will, of premium Wi-Fi services. So sort of bringing the enterprise level features into the open source ecosystem. So this community is set up essentially to deliver a complete end-to-end solution, a platform or a framework, if you will. It comprises continuous integration, automated test environment for all cloud controller and access point firmware functions. The community can consume any layer of the stack and are also welcome to contribute back into any of the components as well. And we're naturally solving things like zero-touch provisioning across all of the white box platforms. And this is enabling low-cost deployment at scale, while also enabling radio resource management to ensure the highest quality, not just in bits per hertz per second, but in client experience that includes roaming and mesh systems as well. And while we begin with a focused mission on Wi-Fi 6 and 6E, we've also leaned this entire solution back onto the Wi-Fi 5 Wave 2 ecosystem of the world and have achieved the same results. So the TIP community really has solved, you could think of it as the plumbing here, to enable commercial value add-on features to really get into Wi-Fi by consuming the cloud from above. So there could be many ways to envision that consumption. Certainly a Wi-Fi MSP is a natural fit. Equally tangible are deployments among carrier, service provider, vertical markets. And fundamentally, Wi-Fi OEMs can really consume the entire TIP stack here for open Wi-Fi and offer an end-to-end product to the market. There are likely additional ways to conceptually pull on the stack here. These are just a few for ideas. Now, those white box platforms cover a fairly broad array of deployment scenarios, both indoor and outdoor, Wi-Fi 5 and 6. And coming early next year, 6E, so 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi platforms. And it's midday here in the Northeast, so a little bit hungry for lunch. So after Elton's presentation, perhaps we should ask, you want 6 gigahertz with that Wi-Fi? But, you know, kidding aside, a mix of 2x2 and 4x4 options across all of these platforms and running with the same hardened operating system and TIP Wi-Fi features that are all managed in that cloud native and cloud agnostic manner via the open controller. So I think everyone today has sort of brought these key points up already. Chris, Kishore, Elton, they all hit on multiple aspects of what we're trying to emphasize or communicate here as well. But we think that deployment at scale and across all the use cases of the WBA members is fairly easy to connect that multiple MSPs, be they over the top or operator managed, can deliver a premium and open source Wi-Fi service that supports zero-touch provisioning, both at the device level as well as in terms of simple federation among authentication providers, OSU platforms, as well as roaming in and across providers, while also supporting other mobile offload scenarios, such as mobile core, WAG interworking and such. All this with radio resource management, optimizing that spectrum management and connection management functionality between both Wi-Fi and mobile networks. So again, it truly is a great time for Wi-Fi, certainly now made even more open through the TIP community. And so with that, conscious of time, happy to entertain any questions we may have, but from David and myself, back to you, Tiago.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris and David, for sharing the TIP initiatives. Yeah, a few questions come up. So Okay, first one is, okay, for a property owner that really wants to embrace open Wi-Fi, so what they should do. So normally they are attached to manufacturers, so what should they do? So they should join TIP. What should be the first step? Let's put it this way.
Sure. Well, I'll take a lean at this one, David, if that's all right. So would always encourage everyone to join TIP. So first off, but I think the answer would depend on the nature of the property owner. So if the property owner is, say, McDonald's, as Elton would perhaps lean forward, they would have, again, 60 million engagements a day over 120 countries, so many opportunities to essentially vertically integrate within their own brand in order to assure quality and assure experience. That could be an opportunity where that level of property owner would become a TIP member first and foremost, would directly engage within the TIP Open Wi-Fi ecosystem, and could become a direct consumer and or contributor of the Open Wi-Fi stack. But more than likely also working with the commercial vendors that are within the TIP Open Wi-Fi community in order to deliver that as essentially an end-to-end product, as it were, in the market. Within the TIP community, for those that maybe are not at the tier 1 property or brand scale, but are looking for a solution that's based on the open Wi-Fi flexibility and the options for choice of platform and choice of controller, the number of vendors that are in the community today ready to support those exact end customers are diverse and rich. So we would encourage folks to come visit the TIP website, consider joining, look at the member directory, come into any of the weekly calls, and learn who they can work with to consume the open Wi-Fi system as a solution from commercial vendors that are in fact delivering end products based on the technology.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. One more question. So how does TIP can manage the Wi-Fi roaming settle model? So the paid model on Wi-Fi roaming, is if it's part of the architecture that you shared.
Sure. So we basically work with settlement, monetization, captive back office partners can all plug in to the cloud layer of the open Wi-Fi system. So our opportunity in that regard is we've certainly come from the experience of many years in Wi-Fi for those that are a part of the open Wi-Fi ecosystem for the TIP project, and have looked at everything from Hotspot 1 to Next Gen to Passpoint, and what we're really seeking to do is get that next level of automation now that we have a much more modern Passpoint and open roaming experience, and build the opportunity for simplified integration among those monetization and authentication back office partners, and use a very simple API key to simply jumpstart where will settlement happen, where will authentication events happen, and allow that to be inherited across the zero-touch provisioning at scale that can go from municipal to retail to enterprise experiences across all the deployed network.
Yeah, fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much. Thanks, David, as well for your presentation. So I propose we move on the agenda. So next speaker is Brian Jacks, so the CEO of YConnect. Brian, over to you.
All right, thanks so much. Let me just share the screen here. Yeah, so Tiago, it's just a great opportunity to participate in this forum. We just so appreciate just being part of this forum focused on public and guest Wi-Fi. My name is Brian Jackson. I'm the CEO of YConnect, a long-term friend, but now YConnect is a new WBA member. And Chris and David, we're also in the TIP community as well, so we appreciate what you're doing there. I'm excited to share with you today a revolutionary new revenue stream we call TRG, or Traffic Revenue Generation. As an industry, we have sought ways to generate advertising-based revenue from Wi-Fi networks that the general public demands to be free of charge. As Elton said earlier, it takes a lot of hamburgers to build and operate networks. That was just a great line. but most have given up when trying to generate revenue through advertising. Well, at YConnect, we have not. We are introducing traffic revenue generation that can not only be used on Wi-Fi networks, but on mobile and fixed networks as well. First, for those of you not familiar with YConnect, we're changing ad tech by offering network owners, advertisers, and programmatic ad platforms new ways to optimize effectiveness. We differentiate ourselves by combining our network background with ad tech expertise. We primarily focus in 3 areas. First, Wi-Fi onboarding technologies. We introduced our captive service and app that is also an SDK for both secure and open networks at the WGC in Frankfurt last fall. That's back when we could actually meet in person. Second, we have a very flexible UX or captive portal that is fully integrated with our advanced advertising platform for sponsored, targeted direct, and programmatic ad sales. This allows us to generate revenue from each and every customer engagement. Now, these first 2 areas of expertise are primarily to assist us in achieving our #1 objective, which is the 3rd item on this slide, generating revenue for our customers that own, manage, or operate networks. As we say, it's a simple idea. It's your network, your users, so it should be your revenue as well. Today, with limited time, I really just want to focus on our TRG, or traffic revenue generation offering. But first, I want to provide context by sharing problems we are solving that plague the advertising industry. First, the decreasing ability to use cookies for device detection. This is just one of the many quotes from those in the advertising industry that are being disrupted by Apple's persistence on not allowing third-party cookies. Firefox and Chrome have followed suit. Apple is taking their internal mandate to limit cookies to the next level with iOS 14, further frustrating ad platforms and ad agencies. Second, there is significant fraud in the programmatic advertising industry. Now, this is nothing new, but it does highlight that the industry's significant attempts to combat fraud have not been effective. And then third, it's the lack of first-party data sources. It's making advertising less effective because audience detection is less precise, placing negative pressure on ad spend ROI. So as I shared, YConnect is introducing a new offering that we call traffic revenue generation, or TRG. No more is ad-based revenue generation restricted to a captive portal that is not appropriate for most Wi-Fi networks. TRG has nothing to do with adding advertising to the captive portal during the onboarding process, though we do that for our networks. TRG is about leveraging and integration with any active network, whether Wi-Fi, fixed, or mobile, to make programmatic advertising more effective. There are billions of ads shown globally via websites and apps while devices connect and use these networks. 87% of all ads are delivered using programmatic platforms. TRG makes this process more efficient while allowing us to generate revenue for network owners and managers. Now, we realize this is a new concept for most in the Wi-Fi industry, so we thought we'd switch it up a bit and show a video to assist in describing TRG. Please take a look.
Every year, Wi-Fi, mobile, and fixed network operators deliver billions of ads as consumers access web pages and apps while using their networks. Other companies are making money from these ads. We think you should too. YConnect's new traffic revenue generation service, or TRG, is a game changer for network owners. Through TRG, network owners can now financially benefit from programmatic advertising revenue generated on their networks without selling or sharing any sensitive user data. TRG leverages real-time data matching, RTDM, to extract unique network-based insights that enhance ad platform effectiveness in identifying each device for improved programmatic advertising delivery. Y-Connect generates revenue by offering RTDM to ad platforms, while working with advertisers to more precisely reach their targeted audiences, all without changing the user's experience. Because TRG directly converts extracted data into ad revenue, it eliminates the need to sell data to third parties, specifically personally identifiable information, a key differentiating feature that protects user data. TRG integration into any Wi-Fi mobile or fixed network is an easy, non-intrusive one-time installation. There's no ongoing maintenance or supervision required by the network operator, and reporting is delivered via dashboard. For advertisers, the benefits are richer engagement with desired audiences for higher ad spend ROI, first-party targeting, and fraud-free advertising. For consumers on your network, there is no impact other than more relevant ads with data transparency combined with control over advertising preferences. For ad platforms, Y-Connect is the only company that leverages network-based data to optimize advertising performance for the programmatic ecosystem. With TRG, Y-Connect is truly changing the data monetization game, generating new streams of revenue for network owners without changing the user's experience.
So again, we know this is new, so I hope the video was helpful. There are a few ways we generate revenue through our TRG offering. 3 of those include cookie matching and real-time device verification to ad platforms. Second, since we have a demand-side platform or DSP, we can identify undervalued ad inventory on networks in real time and sell that ad inventory programmatically at higher rates. And then third, we sell this ad inventory, not data, through direct sales channels that allow us to maximize revenue because we know more about that device than the ad platforms. So these are a few of the ways that we can generate revenue from internet traffic from networks with our TRG service. Now, this is not just theoretical mumbo jumbo. We have performed actual matching and verification working with 4 global SSPs or supply-side platforms. For one of our partner networks, a SSP was only able to identify a device for 47% of their programmatic ad requests through the typical sort of cooking in the browser or ID within an app approach. We were able to match 97% of the devices the SSP was not able to identify using our RTDM or real-time data matching service. This is truly a game changer. Y-Connect's TRG or traffic revenue generation is a new way to generate advertising-based revenue and is applicable for Wi-Fi, fixed, and mobile networks. If anybody would like further information about TRG or any of Y-Connect's offerings, please feel free to contact us. And we just, thank you for your time. Tiago?
Yeah, fantastic presentation, Brian. A couple questions here. So one is about data sharing. So how can you generate revenue without sharing any data? So you mentioned that.
Yeah, so we understand that a lot of people have sold data and they're selling them to third parties like Blue Kai and others, which ultimately use that data for generating advertising based revenue. So we would rather not sell data because we're going to limit the amount of revenue that we can generate. We actually use that data to generate advertising revenue. That way we don't have to share data and we can maximize the revenue that we provide to our network, our partners that are network owners and operators.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. One more question. So in fact, this advertisement and ads business is quite a large business, and there are many big companies involved. So how do you guys really differentiate from them? There is very big players involved on this business.
Sure, and you know, it's a pretty mature industry, and there are a lot of great players in the industry. But there's a number of ways that they perform retargeting, and what retargeting is that when you go to a website, what happens is they may place a cookie on your browser, and then when you go to other websites, you'll see advertising from that first website that you visited or that app that you were in. And that's the way the industry has primarily, you know, dealt with advertising. It's all about how they deal with the browser. It has nothing to do with the actual network itself. As far as we know, we're the only ones that actually take network-based information to improve the advertising or the programmatic ecosystem, or all of those ad platforms that are trying to make sure that those advertisers are getting those ads to the audiences that those advertisers desire. So that's the differentiation. Again, we are using network-based data to maximize advertising performance.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for sponsoring the event. It was a great pleasure to have you on this session today. Okay, so I propose we move on to our last speaker, and we are already a few minutes late. So last speaker is my colleague, Steve Nam. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Tiago. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity here. I'll just pull my screen up. Okay, so last speaker of the day. I think we all have that image of Elton's burger in our heads as well. It's getting towards dinner time in Europe as well, so I'll try to be brief as well. So yeah, I'll continue on the theme of public Wi-Fi as well. I wanted to focus more on open roaming and what the WBA and its members are doing to help organizations, you know, build their roaming businesses, build success, but also ultimately how we can deliver the best user experience for you know, for all different types of consumers over Wi-Fi as well. Okay. For those of you that don't know me as well through WBA engagements or others, I joined the WBA last November, taking care of the industry alliances and the memberships. Prior to that, I worked for a software company in the area of roaming for 16 years. So this topic of open roaming is something close to my heart. Okay. First of all, I just wanted to reflect on, I guess, the journey that we've been on from a Wi-Fi perspective over the last 21 years. So 3 weeks ago, we celebrated World Wi-Fi Day, and I think we've all seen a lot happen in that time. I don't think I'll be offending the other panelists to say that we were probably there at the start of the journey. A lot has happened, so I think sort of, you know, the expectations about where Wi-Fi is or is expected to be, it's not just something we see in the workplace or at home, you know, but in many public spaces and hotels. As Elton, I think it was fascinating to hear from Elton about how seriously, you know, McDonald's are taking this topic of Wi-Fi on many different things, not just the PCs, as Kishore noted. You know, that evolved pretty quickly to handsets and tablets, but on consumer electrics, you know, vehicles, industrial equipment. You know, I'm in my office here, and I've got the utility behind me, and the washing machine actually works off Wi-Fi as well. So I think, you know, it's certainly moved on as well. And then the users. So we've seen a huge generational change, you know, in this century. What their expectations are. You know, my son, who's 5 last year, when we went on holiday and flew on the plane, there was a clear expectation, and you know, he didn't know what I did for a living, but he just assumed that basically he'd be able to get his YouTube clips on the plane, no issue, over the Indian Ocean, and we'd never discussed that before. And then I think the different organizations, you know, that are participating in this as well. So, you know, traditionally we had the operators and the vendors, but we're seeing many different types of organizations now, you know, get involved in Wi-Fi in the public venue space, but also the online retailers, the industrial organizations. I think where it's evolved to, this has been touched on a few times, is that Wi-Fi has effectively become a utility. And I remember, similar to Chris and his slide on JD Wetherspoons and how seriously the pub chain was taking Wi-Fi. This survey that JD Power ran 10 years ago on how hotels and the guests are viewing, Wi-Fi as an amenity. In fact, in certain hotel classes, how it was a top amenity. And this statement I read on my commute into London one day in the Metro paper about how clean beds, basically Wi-Fi ranks more highly than a clean bed or room. And I'm not entirely sure I agree with that statement or with that quote. But yeah, it was interesting to me. And then even back in 2001, we had our first glimpse of in-flight Wi-Fi. So Boeing started out a business unit Connection. Several of the big airlines, Lufthansa, United, Delta, American, were involved. So we even had our sort of, our first venture into in-flight Wi-Fi about 19 years ago. Okay. And I think we all see that the ecosystem has evolved, the different experiences that we're seeing today. But there are still challenges. I mean, we all are familiar with basically things that we've read or experienced, unfortunately, with security. The experience, the user experience, the frustrations that we sometimes have, the quality of service, the deployments in terms of coverage and capacity is lacking. Some of these images I think will be all very, very familiar to all of us as well, but trying to find passwords in public places, sometimes they're too complicated. Concerns about sharing passwords and how that's jeopardizing or causing a security risk. Just all of these things, that doesn't make it a particularly sort of easy experience as such, and I think we'd like to see it done better. Now, I think the good news, and we've heard from many of these organizations today, is that they're here. So from McDonald's, from Global Reach, Boingo, from TIP, from Sterlite, Y-Connect, how can we actually make Wi-Fi better? So they all represent different types of venues, different types of user experience. They all have different objectives, but they're here talking and sharing their experiences and how they intend to evolve Wi-Fi over the next years and decades even. And I believe they all share this common vision. I'm showing it along the bottom here, but how do we actually create this seamless interoperable service experiences on Wi-Fi? I think the WBA, has been, particularly over the last couple of years, promoting, championing this topic of roaming to the point where this year, we, with the help of the members, launched open roaming. So I'll just explain a little bit more about what that is, but essentially I'll drill down on sort of two components. But open roaming is effectively a federation of members from all parts of the wireless ecosystem working to deliver this vision of seamless interoperable Wi-Fi. And what we've done effectively is leverage from the rest of the industry a technical framework, built on industry standards that all members can leverage. The benefits here, how can organizations grow their coverage? How can we accelerate time to market in terms of network integrations? And again, as I mentioned earlier, how many different types of organizations can participate as well. Also supports all different types of business models. So whether we're talking about free networks or paid for networks and premium networks, open roaming can handle those different types of business situations. Okay. There are different players within the open roaming ecosystem. So we have the ecosystem brokers up here on the top left. So what I'm talking about here specifically are the technology enablers. So these are the organizations that work as registration authorities, equipment vendors, roaming hubs, and interconnect partners. And then we have the identity providers. And this is quite a broad, I guess, ecosystem or type of provider that we're seeing here. So it can be anybody from the mobile operators to anybody owning a subscriber set. So even McDonald's in this instance could be classified as an identity provider. We have the network providers. So these are the organizations building out the networks, and then the end users. So we're talking about the operating systems and the devices and the users themselves. Okay. And what I'll do here, I'll just reflect basically some of the, I guess, the components through the building blocks behind open roaming. So first off, and I think a few of us have touched on this today, but open roaming is addressing security head on. We're using what's called a public key infrastructure for managing the certificates to make the service secure. We're also using this idea of the federation, where each member inside open roaming has their own unique WBA ID to identify themselves to each other, and also to support different policies. And then the WBA RIC standard itself. So this is the suite of documentation that enables the roaming interconnect clearing and settlement between different members of the WBA open roaming. And then finally, we also are leveraging the Passpoint technology to aid that network discovery and help users connect seamlessly to networks. And you can see on the right-hand side, we have the open roaming framework. So this is really a document that's easy to follow for members so that they can see what's involved in terms of getting onboarded when it comes to open roaming and how to work with each other as well. Okay. And I'll build out this slide quickly so you can see what we're doing here in terms of a flow perspective. So what we have over on the left-hand side is the open roaming network provider that's working with their ecosystem broker and then plugging into the federation. And then they'll go through this process of identity discovery, and then the user is automatically connected onto the network. And as I touched on previously, security is also being considered here. So we have this PKI infrastructure. So, all participants select their policies and their desired business cases, and they're ready to go. Okay, just switching tracks a little bit, I just want to share a bit on where we are in terms of its evolution and from a membership standpoint. So within the WBA, there are roughly around 100 organizations, and 35 of those organizations are participating in open roaming today. And in fact, even in our our new membership recruitment, 12 organizations have joined this year specifically for open roaming. Okay. And then how to participate. So it's relatively straightforward. We'd love you to get involved. So effectively, anybody can join open roaming. You can adopt the open roaming framework and standards. You can then start to select your interconnect models, identify your partners, and agree your business terms, and then configure your networks and devices using the open roaming framework. And that was really it. You're ready to go. Okay. Yeah. So I think if anybody would like to find out more, feel free to contact any of the WBA staff, or we have this this contact alias here, contact us at thewbaalliance.com. Okay, and thank you. All right, Tiago, I think it's back to you, unless anybody has questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. Great presentation, and thank you for sharing the opportunity for open roaming. And we don't have much time. We are already running 5 minutes over the hour. So I just leave the message that anyone that is interested in open roaming, either to deploy open roaming or just to test it, to understand the technology, feel free to reach out to the Alliance, either directly to me or to Steve, or just go to our website and drop a message. We'll be more than happy to share more information about it, and even if needed, we can do a pilot or a field trial that you can understand more about open roaming. Just a very quick conclusion. My take of being involved in public Wi-Fi for almost 20 years, definitely there is a lot of ground that we managed to cover. I still remember then when Wi-Fi somehow were having 2 or 3 customers a day on some hotspots. Today, Wi-Fi in public places is available everywhere. So several of you shared that on today's presentation. And we all saw as well that there is significant improvements coming up, either from the technology, either from new platforms, either from new services, or even different ways to deploy the connectivity, either by having cloud services or edge computing techniques to the Wi-Fi. So I want to thank you all by being part of this panel. So Chris, Kishore, Elton, Shantanu, David, Brian, Steve, thank you so much for being part of this. I just give this last message. If you enjoy this webinar, please don't miss the next one about cybersecurity and identity. We'll cover some of the topics that we talked about, but with a much stronger angle on how to make Wi-Fi more secure and how to guarantee the privacy of our information. And just to leave a final message, I believe we all love Wi-Fi. It's part of our DNA in WBA. So big thank you for all of you and stay connected. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.